Hey everybody, thanks for clicking through. This is Tony from the Bigfoot Art Classes. Really happy to be here with you again for another fun art project. I want to thank Tracy and Michelle and everyone at the Temecula Valley Museum for facilitating this. And let's go over some of the supplies that you're going to need to complete this project today. Okay, so you will need an eraser and a pencil. Sharpie might be handy to have on hand. You're going to need a watercolor set, either a standard tray, something along the lines of this, of course with some water, or something along the lines of this self-contained set here. Okay, so those are the things that we're going to need to make the awesome art today. We need to put it on something. I have here 3 sizes of 140-pound watercolor paper. This is pretty rigid and really great for this project, this type of project. So if you have 140-pound watercolor paper, that's fine. If you have a lower weight watercolor paper, that works very well also. Even if you have mixed media paper, you could use that today. Now, all of that being said, this project today can be done on regular paper. You could use colored pencils, you could use markers for this project. So one way or the other, you can use whatever supplies you have on hand to make some art with me today. However, if you do have any mixed media paper, watercolor paper, if you have a watercolor set handy, that probably will be the most fun for completing this project. So go ahead and pause this video, grab all of your supplies, make sure you have everything you need for moving forward, and we'll get started with this really fun watercolor project. Okay, before we actually start painting today, I want to talk to you a little bit about how to be a lot less frustrated when you're doing a watercolor project. It has to do with fixing the paper. Even the best watercolor paper will sometimes buckle, arch, bend when you apply water to it. So as you can see here, I have taped down this piece of watercolor paper to hold it down while I do my painting. So I'm gonna show you a couple different ways to do this and hopefully reduce your frustration level with watercolor. There's a couple things that make watercolor sometimes frustrating, so I'm gonna try to help you with those as we go along, okay? So I'm gonna be painting here with just a regular watercolor set, nothing fancy. Whatever you have will work, okay? And I'm gonna use a large brush for this first step, okay? Now the way that you watercolor is such that you don't scoop the paint, you don't really push the brush into the watercolor. You literally just add water to it. This is how you activate watercolor, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I've just activated some yellow, and I'm just gonna do the center portion of this paper with a lot of water and yellow paint. Just kind of focus on the center third of it. Get lots of yellow down there. So as we're going along here, a lot of water is good and a lot of paint is good, okay? So I'm gonna next activate some red. And I'm gonna start here at the bottom with some red. And I'm gonna start at the bottom, staying away from that wet yellow. But once we get up to the yellow, I'm just gonna let those two meet and do what they will. Okay. So there's gonna be some fun things that take place here as the colors begin to interact, okay? So if you go to Jamaica, you'll see a lot of these 3 colors, red, gold, and green. There's even a song about it, a reggae song about it. So we're gonna make a background today using those 3 colors. Jamaica is a very beautiful country. I had the the pleasure of going there earlier in my life, and it was every bit as beautiful as I had ever heard it described. And you see a lot of this color not only in the towns or establishments, but you also see this color in nature there a lot through the flora and the fauna, and even the music. Very colorful country. So this is our wet on dry wash, dry paper, a lot of water and wet paint. And if you look, you can sort of see with this paint going off to the tape, it's because the paper is starting to lift in the middle a little bit. So even the tape doesn't hold it down supremely flat, but this is a much less frustrating setup than if you just were painting onto the dry paper without having it taped down, okay? So this is the wash that we're gonna do, and I'm gonna encourage you to do this 2 or 3 times, okay? Because when you're doing a project like this one, it helps to kind of have a couple different choices, or possibly even the option to do multiple paintings. So I'm gonna set this aside for now to let it dry. And I'm gonna show you another technique that you can use to mitigate some of this frustration. If you're on a glass surface like this, or granite, or some sort of plastic or whatever table that you have, if it's water safe, you can just apply water to the surface. So I'm just literally brushing water onto the surface here. And then with your watercolor paper, you can then just press it down onto the wet surface. This will tack it down and help you with that buckling or arching frustration, okay? So same thing here. I'm gonna activate some yellow on my second piece of paper, and I'm just gonna put the yellow onto the center third of it. Lots of water, and just, you can see the paper starting to buckle right away here. So we can just add more water to where that's happening and press that down. This one's being really testy. I'm using a thicker, like 140 weight paper. So it's really gonna wanna fight me a little bit. Sometimes you have to put a lot of water down. You can see where taping down might be a better option from the get-go, with your thicker papers especially. I'm just gonna hold this down and let it soak up some of that water on the back side while I do the back here. Let's see how it does. Go ahead and start with my red now. And again, I'm gonna put my red in down here by itself first, so it can just be red. And coming up to the yellow, I'm going to just encourage it to interact. Drop some dots in if you want. Just encourage it to interact with the yellow a little bit. And I'll do the same thing here with the top. Seems like that red, adding that red to the top and maybe to the sides has encouraged that paper to lay down a little bit. So I'm gonna hydrate some green here. Just give myself some green up at the top. Nice and bright green up at the top, coming down. all green until it starts to interact with the yellow here. So the more water you have, the more blending and sort of playing the colors will do with each other. So you can see here, my paper's finally flat based on it being wet on the bottom, backside. And now these colors are starting to sort of interact with each other, make a little bit of an interesting blend. You should get maybe some oranges in this area, maybe some lime greens in this area, or some lighter greens at least. So I would encourage you to do this, like I said, a few times, at least 2 or 3 times, just to give yourself some choices on the background that you use first, and then potentially, like I said, 3 or 4 backgrounds that you could, double up or triple up on these paintings. It's so much fun to do this, and they don't take a long time, so may as well make a few of them, right? All right, so I'm gonna clean this up and get this set aside so I can do one final one with you, because I do have 3 myself. So I will be right back. Alrighty, I've got a third paper here, a little bit larger size. And once again, I'm just gonna repeat that process. I have this one taped down. So starting with the yellow. Hope you're enjoying this process of even just making the backgrounds. I mean, these backgrounds with different color blends can be painted together in one session and set aside for different paintings later on, which is kind of cool. It just depends on your process, how you like to work and your environment a little bit. I mean, if you've got little kiddos running through the area and touching everything, maybe, that doesn't work. Although I would encourage, all ages to do this together, because this is a really fun project for all ages. So I'm gonna just let these 2 colors here play, and I'm gonna finish up with some green here on this one. You're gonna need some significant drying time when you do this very wet technique for a background wash like this. So I would say, just factor that in. You're gonna have to probably set it aside for a little bit. I'm gonna try a little darker green too here, just to make a little different here. I'm gonna try a little bit of a darker green up at the top here. And let these kind of 2 greens work together. But try both techniques with the taping down and the waters on the surface. See which one you like the best. I think that the taping down is pretty enjoyable. A lot less frustration. All right, so I've got these 3 different backgrounds set up here, and just letting them play and interact with each other makes for some interesting blending, shapes, things like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this one aside. And I have one here that I did before. And this one has a really light green on top. But I'm just gonna show you a couple techniques here. So when you have a dry background, it's very important that the background be dry for what we're gonna do next. So I think the 3 most important components are dry paper, you're gonna need black paint. So make sure your set has a black. And then you're gonna need a small brush, okay? So what we're gonna do, and I will put up the reference here of the idea that we're going after, is the reggae song, Three Little Birds, or Everything's Gonna Be All Right. We're gonna paint three little birds on this sort of very colorful background, okay? So put on the song while you're painting. Might be a great source of inspiration or a lot of fun just to put on that very happy song. I'm gonna show you right now with a smaller brush how to go ahead and just go for broke on this and sort of freestyle your three little birds on here. Now you have choices. You can go horizontal, you can go vertical, you can do one branch with three birds on it, you can do three branches with a bird on each branch. So give some thought to the size and shape of your paper, the orientation of your paper. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna activate some black paint here. And I think for this first one, I'm gonna do three branches. So I'm gonna come from the left side here. I'm gonna come down to give myself some space for the bird. And then I'm just gonna kind of drop in a line for the branch. And probably just make sure that it's a little bit thicker on the origin side of it. And then it should get somewhat thinner as it goes out towards the end. You might need to hit the end or hit the line twice just to get a nice black. So branch number one, I'm gonna do another branch over here. Branches are fun because you can just kind of, I mean, there's no set direction or shape for a branch. You can sort of do, you know, whatever you like. So branch coming from the left, one from the right. I'll do one more down here from the left again. Probably want it to be pretty close to the bottom. So, you know, you can see that I'm rustling a little bit with the paper here, but nothing too bad. So, you know, taping your paper down for this portion of the project is certainly an idea that you might consider. So I have my three branches. And I'm pretty happy with how they look. I like three different looking branches, so they're not copies of each other. So three branches, three different looking branches. And I'll show you how to do pretty simple birds. So what you want to do is you want to start with an oval shape, touching the branch, then do a circle shape that is not touching the oval, okay? And then you just bring yourself a little beak coming out. Okay. Once you have that, fill in the oval and the circle. Connect them from the back of the circle, the back side of the bird. Something like that. Okay. Now in Jamaica, they have these birds that have very long, beautiful tail plumage, if that's the right word. So I'm just gonna come down with a couple of really pretty tail plumes like that. And there you've got your first bird. Looks pretty good, right? So again, we're gonna do that here. Try to look at the space that you have available. And again, same thing, oval, circle, give yourself a little beak. Connect from the back end to give yourself a little neck. And then you can come down with some tail plumage. So just do something like that. Okay. Now the secret to what I just did for the tail plumage, the feathers, is to push when you start and then let it go as you go up, okay? So you might play with doing some practice runs on a separate piece of paper first. But here I'm gonna do my third oval. My circle. This guy's looking up a little bit. Connect. And then because this guy's feathers won't really show as much, I'm just gonna take them down to the end of the paper. I guess as long as I have them distinctly two, you kind of get the idea, right? So this is three little birds, Jamaican birds with their long tail feathers. Just black paint right on top of the red, gold, and green, the red, yellow, green wash, okay? So that's one way to do it, is just to use that nice black contrasty color over the top to create a very nice little composition, okay? So that's just one idea. Let me go to my first background that I did on this video. Mostly dry. I think it's good. Okay. So here I'm going to show you another technique that you can use to maybe reduce some of the frustration. If you're not confident just with your brushwork right onto the paper without any planning, okay? So I will show you that technique. And then we've got a couple more. So if the brush kind of freaks you out and you haven't done a lot of brush work, you're more comfortable with something in your hand like a marker, you could use a Sharpie. Make sure that your paper's pretty dry because wet paper will tend to ruin or make the Sharpie a little less effective. But you could kind of come through with your Sharpie and just kind of plan some stuff out first with this. Maybe plan it out a little bit with the Sharpie, okay? In this case, what you can do is kind of put your lines down with Sharpie first. Just to sort of see what it's going to look like, and also to give yourself a little more comfort in hand. So this is a way that you can start with something more comfortable to you. Get your lines down and kind of see it first, okay? Little extra level of control, if you will, okay? So then going back with the smaller brush and the black paint, okay? So now we can just kind of come in here and fill these in. With the nice contrasty black paint. I will say, just as you're doing this, when you're painting the birds, be kind of careful with the beak, because the beak can get too big kind of quick. So these birds should be pretty similar in terms of their shape and their characteristics. So you can see where these two beaks are not the same. I like this one better, the second one that I did. So I thought I would mention that to you. So there's a couple of birds there. I also think it's interesting to make the birds looking different directions. Maybe not all three are looking the same direction. So give that some thought too. So an example here of just how to kind of get started with a Sharpie and then paint over the Sharpie, just to give yourself a little bit of a head start or an indicator before you go with the paint, if you're not as comfortable with your brushwork, okay? So that's one little additional tip that I can give you. You could also do that first step instead of with a Sharpie. You could do that first step with pencil, which is a little bit less contrasty, but still very effective for establishing kind of what your subjects are going to be on the painting, okay? So this is another little sample here, and I am going to wait for my other samples to dry, and then I'll show you a couple other tips with how to do that. And we're also going to be showing you a little bit about how to do some lettering, okay? So we'll show you that in just a minute. Alrighty, just to give you some additional choices and options and things to consider, I'm going to move forward here doing some lettering as well as the birds for our painting. So before we get started, this area right here is called a bloom. This is where the paints interact and really start to do some interesting things. So if you get that in your different samples that you make, congratulations, because that can be really cool and make for an even more beautiful painting. You can also, take a look at what direction you'd like to have the orientation of the painting go. In this case, I'm going to do it green on the bottom, red on the top. And I'm going to show you how to use a pencil this time to start to get your composition together. Okay, so we're going to put the branch in first, and we'll put it in this general area here. And then we'll have, I want to kind of work around this bloom because it's so interesting. So I'm going to put the body here, body of the bird here, and then his feathers will come down there. Now, the Bob Marley album Uprising had some really cool lettering, so we're going to use a Jamaican term with that style of lettering to just kind of give you an example of how you could incorporate lettering into the painting itself. So the Jamaican term is Irie, which is a term that means, you know, everything's going to be all right, everything's good, everything's copacetic, everything's happy. So that's I-R-I-E with an exclamation point. So I-R-I-E with an exclamation point, 5 characters. The third one being the center, so I-R-I-E with the exclamation point. So it's going to be the second I that we put in the center, okay? So I'm going to make just light pencil here for that center. And now I know I need an I-R and an I-E with the exclamation point. I-R-I, oh, just an E with an exclamation point, yeah. So I'm going to do the first I here. I-R-I-E with an exclamation point, okay? So this is the way that you can kind of use your pencil to lightly build your composition, and most importantly, get your eyes on it. Take a look at it and sort of, you know, see it before you commit to it in too much of an extreme form. So we have our composition down. We're going to go with the black paint now. So I'll start with the bird and the branch. So I'm going to start here thick and have it get thinner as it comes down, something along the lines of that. And we'll do just an oval for the body, a circle for the head, the beak, just a sort of a line to establish, and then we'll color in and connect from the back, something along the lines of that. So this is how we can get the bird in place here. And then the tail feathers, which just come down something like this. So we've got the bird in place, and let's see, bird in place. And now we can sort of go up to the lettering. Key to this is a smaller brush. So try to get a small brush, which will give you a little more control as well as thin lines. Okay. So this is a little bit of just a block lettering technique, like I said, sort of inspired by the Bob Marley Uprising album. And we're just using our pencil lines to kind of get that in place there. And then just starting thin and then getting thicker. The key is to, you know, get a look at it before you really do anything. So the I, the R, the I, and the E. And the exclamation point. That's just one way to kind of incorporate some lettering if you wanted to do that. And this could be anything that you're comfortable with. Could be, like I said, 3 little birds, everything's gonna be all right. Obviously, the more letters in the words that you choose, the more you have to sort of plan and lay out and sort of confirm, make sure that it's going to look the way you want it. So that is an idea of how to get some lettering placed within your composition. So utilizing the bloom, it kind of looks like a tree line, maybe a tree there with the bird and the tree line. directly behind it and maybe some sort of a sunset. That just makes for kind of a nice little composition if you wanted to do some lettering. Okay. So here's another example of a background that was done. And this has a nice bloom in it, a couple nice blooms in it, and a really nice blend. I'm actually going to do this one horizontal. So again, if you want to use your pencil, you can lightly sort of map things out as you go, okay? So here, I'm going to bring up a branch from the bottom along the lines of that. Put the bird here. Utilize all this sort of bloom action going on, and then I'm gonna write the word Jamaica. And I'm gonna do Jamaica in like a script or a cursive, so big J, staying away from the bird as much as possible. A-I-C-A, Jamaica. Okay. So the pencil can kind of get your composition set in place. At least you can take a look at it. You might even be able to erase a little bit or start light and darken if you want to. Okay. So just like we've done before, now that we have our composition planned out here, we're going to start thicker and darker here. Do our branch. Some nice brush strokes. Maybe get thicker here, right? Go ahead and do our bird with our oval. Our circle. Connecting from the back. Nice bird silhouette. Careful with the beak. Start with just a line. Just kind of go lightly there. I'll put a couple of feathers down. So there we've got our bird in place. You can see that this is drying a little bit gray, a little bit dry, a little bit light. So you may need to go over it to get your contrast set, okay? Now, in this particular case, we've got this lettering to do here, so I'm just going to start really super thin. Try to keep in mind the flow. And if you start thin, you can always see it first and go over it and make it thicker, darker as you go along. Okay, so you can get your lettering in. I might even recommend that you let this dry. You can see that it's drying a little bit gray. Maybe you like that. Maybe it looks fine without being completely black on top of there. I'm actually liking this quite a bit right now, so I'm going to hesitate to do too much to it. But what you can do is just sort of a quality control, is make sure that anything that's too thin, maybe you just address a little bit. Some nice pointies on the ends. And just make sure that each letter, especially if you're doing cursive. There's a lot of little nuances and things like that. But I actually like the way that's looking. I think I'm tempted to just let it be. I'm going to just make sure that the bird has plenty of contrast here. As it dries, you can start to see it lighten up just a little bit. And that's an example of, you know, how to do some lettering and incorporate that within your composition, okay? So a lot of fun options you can do. Just as I mentioned before, if you paint multiple of these backgrounds, you can make many of these paintings. And you can actually, you know, have several of them to choose from, or to, you know, put up on the wall, give out as gifts. But it can be a lot of fun to do these paintings. So hopefully you've enjoyed this, giving you many different pointers and tips. Here's one that I did before that says 3 little birds. It's a lot of letters, and you have to really make sure that you're happy with, you know, that overall task or endeavor. Here's the Irie with the 1 bird, and this was another 3 bird that we did here. Still drying a little bit. Now those paper that you've taped down, the paper that you've taped down, you can see here that when you carefully remove the tape, you actually get a little bit of a border, which can be kind of nice and maybe add to your overall sort of effect of the painting. And it just gives you kind of a neat little extra bonus there when you tape things down. So I hope you've enjoyed this today. It's been a lot of fun to present this to you. And again, thanks to the Temecula Valley Museum and to Tracy and to Michelle and the staff there for always providing such a wonderful environment and opportunities for the public to come in and get creative when we do our second Saturdays in our art room there on the 2nd floor. So hope you've enjoyed this. Have some fun with it, you know, practice it a few times, and I'm pretty confident that you'll wind up with something that you're happy with, okay? So thanks again to everybody, and for you for sticking with me here and clicking through. And we hope to see you soon in person or online here with the second Saturday art series.